Како Европската Унија гледа на проширувањето во време на војна во Украина и светска криза? Колку 2030 година е реална година за Македонија да стане членка на ЕУ? Европат во Виена, Австрија. Останете со нас.
Mr. Marsiјак, first of all, thank you for your time today. Let's talk about enlargement. How do you see enlargement of European Union at this moment?
We have noticed that enlargement has been stuck for some time. Now we have a series of steps, so new steps with Bosnia-Herzegovina, with Albania and North Macedonia, which indicate that there's some movement on the enlargement agenda. However, these small steps do not produce the kind of dynamic which we could expect, a dynamic looking forwards and where we know the direction concretely and the achievements which will be reached. This is because the context has changed and there is a lack of traction still remaining on the side of the member states regarding how important enlargement is for the EU and what should be the factors, the conditions structuring these kind of decisions. So there are some steps for the countries, but behind that there's still a looming, some missing traction on the side of the member states.
We have new methodology. We started first intergovernmental political conference with EU. We have unique negotiation framework. Albania not, but they also started negotiations with EU. But can we have a full enlargement in the next period like it was before, when the member states now, Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania, in the European Union?
I think it's a little bit early to know if we can still think in terms of enlargement with the same paradigm as we had before. We noticed that there was a link, so there was missing political engagement for many years now. And the war in Ukraine has brought the topic of political engagement very much on the table, but it doesn't reflect so much in the Western Balkans. We see that with Serbia, for instance, there is not a political pressure in applying the new methodology. So the new methodology is there. It follows a more technocratic way of engagement, and the political elements of it have not yet materialized in the Western Balkans so much. So we are still continuing a little bit with the same methods, although we have a new document telling us we should act more politically.
Yes. Do you think that they slow down the whole process?
The process to gain momentum needs to be politicized, but politicized also in a good way. Politicized not only by having veto player blocking neighbors. This is a negative side of politicization. We need member states engaging politically, so for engagement, drawing a vision, and so explaining why enlargement is extremely important for the European projects. So this part of thinking of political engagement which is missing. Instead of that, we have the business as usual approach of satisfying criteria and trying to make progresses and validating that, but it's a very lengthy process where the political goal is not very clear.
EU is facing with a lot of crises and problems in the last years. Not only the war in Ukraine, but also finding consensus maybe with the budget, with the refugee migrant crisis back then at 2015, 2016, and all the time there are some kind of problems. There was an idea about EU in circles. The last thing that happened was that Croatia became member of the Schengen zone and EU zone, but not Bulgaria and Romania. Can this idea be realistic in future, or maybe it's happening already?
Yeah, it is happening, and differentiate integration, the fact of having different speed and countries joining some elements of European integration, or not all of them, is quite an ancient one. It's necessary to have that because it allows the EU to deepen, despite the fact that some countries do not want it to deepen. That's why we have this kind of differentiated integration. However, so far it was not the rule. This was more an exception. There was a political vision for the EU to deepen the project, to turn it into a political union. And the means was to try to accommodate the interests of the member states who were reluctant by allowing this kind of differentiated integration. The new ideas which come on the table, so to have these circles or phased integration, they tend to want to try to turn these exceptions into a rule. And I think that's an element, a limiting element, because we need to keep in mind what is the purpose of the European integration project. It's not only something which is trying to bring interests of the member states together, it should have a higher collective purpose. And here I think we should not allow too much this differentiation. There should be a union and a way to join the union without diluting the political activeness in some stages or circles.
What do you think about the European political community beside the enlargement process? It became like an idea, but there is a feeling that nobody knows actually what is going to happen with that and what is going to be the main purpose or goal.
Yeah, this European political community idea.
Like abstractive.
Yes, it has been so launched by on the idea of Enrico Letta and Emmanuel Macron. It's an idea which comes back to Mitterrand as Confédération Européenne. I think basically it is a very nice idea. It is an idea because it avoids making some kind of separation between what are the member states and non-member states. We have this separation is sometimes very, very, very not fact-based. We have countries and societies in countries which are not member of the European Union, for instance, North Macedonia, which in many respects show a much bigger democratic commitment than some member states themselves. I'm thinking about Hungary. So in these respects, having a bigger framework where countries which are not member of the EU can be valued for what they do in terms of trajectory, democratic trajectory, for instance, so without being pointed as non-member is a good thing. But unfortunately, the project initiative, how it materializes so far, doesn't go that far. It is a purely intergovernmental meeting, only with the leaders of the member states. So the negotiations about the interests is the first purpose or the first role. I think it would be interesting to think about what can be done to put on an equal footing citizens of EU member states and non-EU member states. So boosting the exchanges and trying to bolster this loyalty, this European loyalty, by having some movement, including at school level, so which extends beyond just EU member states. I think this is by focusing on people, young people within the European political community, that we can build this kind of political engagement so among younger generations. And here we have a good source of energy in non-member states like in North Macedonia.
If we put aside the politicians, how the people in European Union think actually, what is their opinion about the enlargement, maybe here in Austria?
It depends very much on the countries in which we observe this tendencies.
Here in Austria, because
Austria,
in France we know that the people are not fan of the enlargement.
Here in Austria, there are a lot of people, a big part of the society, which comes from the region. So it's before the crisis, the pandemic, it was 25% of the young students who were coming from the Western Balkans. So here there is, in this respect, a very big openness and a very big support for enlargement towards the Western Balkans, not towards Turkey, but towards the Western Balkans. It has historical reasons, and it also reflects the priorities of foreign policy of Austria. But I think the key challenge in how to build a better common understanding among the member states, societies, about what enlargement is about and what it should be about. So here, this is where we need to work much more. The Western Balkans are not known enough in France, for instance, in countries in the West. And this is this ignorance which fuels many prejudices and reluctance. So that's a very simple element in the end, but which is not easy to deal with. In Austria, we are much closer to Western Balkans, so of course the support is higher.
You are expert of the Western Balkans. You observed all the 6 countries of Western Balkans 6. Where do you see now the biggest problem and the focus that needs to be solved at this moment?
There is not one, there are several.
Yes.
But I think...
Even though the Serbia-Kosovo now is...
Precisely. I think this is where the EU is the EU and the member states of the EU so are really seeing what is at stake. This is with Serbia. This is with Serbia, because with Serbia we really have a problem. There is no other way to name it. We have a geopolitical context which has changed massively. We have a new methodology telling us that political engagement alignment has become more important, but it doesn't reflect in the positions the EU and its member states take. So towards Serbia, which is not aligning with the sanctions of the EU, which is welcoming and still continuing visiting high officials in Russia. So there is no change of course of action on the Serbian side and no reaction on the European side. That is extremely problematic because it is just undermining completely the political credibility of the EU towards its whole accession process. So we need here to set a little bit the priorities right, to determine what is important. Politically, right now, what is important is really to know who are our allies and how to support them. Within Serbia, there are allies of the EU, so civil society forces. We need to show much more support for these against a regime which is not aligning itself at all with the project of European integration.
How do you see Macedonian path through EU? Because we have unique negotiating framework. We started first intergovernmental conference, but we have condition for the second one, or for officially to start the clusters. So how do you see Macedonian path through?
I think the way to solve or to try to solve the blockage, the blockade of Bulgaria has been not a very happy one. It has lifted on the short term, so the Bulgarian resistance or veto, but there is still a sword, Damocles sword, on the head of Macedonia, North Macedonia, about what will happen tomorrow. There are so very heavy work, domestic work, constitutional reforms to be done, which is already extremely complicated as such. It's a new condition which should not be there, to be honest. And there is this question of history looming a little bit on the accession process. I think it shows a little bit the paradox that we have these small steps being made, so by the EU and the countries aspiring to join the EU, opening accession negotiations or getting studies as candidate status, but we don't have a clear perspective of accession. So this is this mismatch. There are some steps, the illusion of moving forwards, but the goal remains as fuzzy, as unpredictable, and as lengthy as it was before. What we would need is not just a small fix, as you say, a specific fix for North Macedonia. It goes way beyond. It touches about Serbia, it touches about Bosnia. What we need is to set a clear objective, to consolidate the political objective. This is only this way that we can make the accession process more credible, and then the rest will follow how to get there. So just to open the small step without making this goal clear is not bringing, honestly, very much on the table. And here, there's certainly much to be done in the countries of the region in transforming the governance system, democratizing the rule of law and so on, but they are doing that for themselves. What is needed is from the member states to see very much what kind of political utility, what kind of political moral should guide the accession process. This is very much the member states which should also talking to the accession member states in defining these new goals.
Macedonian government has a goal, 2030, 2030, to become a member state of European Union. How realistic is this plan?
Well, Ukraine also has a goal, which is not even 2030. To put a date, I think is a very good idea, but I think it should not be North Macedonia or Ukraine putting a date. It should be the member states putting a date, because if you put a date and say we will make sure that the countries are open at that date. There will be two effects to that. The first one is that you rise the costs of non-accession for the countries, like for instance right now Serbia, who are not determined into committing themselves to European integration. So they will be left alone because the others will be joining at the set dates. So that will raise the cost of non-accession for these countries. Having a date by the member states will also raise the cost of non-enlargements. Because if the EU member states and the EU keep saying that accession is the most successful foreign policy tool, but if they cannot deliver themselves by agreeing a unanimity at that set dates, it means that they just don't walk the talk. So that will increase the cost of non-enlargements. That would bring credibility a boost, and I think that would be necessary. Having dates proclaimed on the side of the aspiring member states might be useful to keep the momentum, but unfortunately we should keep in mind that the accession process is an alignment process. It is a convergence, so a question of convergence, but this is also and above all a co-optation process. You need the support of the member state. This is how it works so far. I wish it could be different, but this is how it works. And this co-optation process only works if all the member states agree to proceed. It is not the case.
What is your advice for our government? Because North Macedonia has a long way now to Europe, to you.
I mean, North Macedonia has been, and the government has been going at length in achieving what has been thought unachievable. And we see many times, also with Kosovo, so countries trying to change deeply what is at stake. And I think that's for good. That's very much for good. At some point, it come back to this co-optation process. I think it's important to find allies in the member states while continuing the reforms, while trying not to lose the support, the popular support, domestic support within the country, but to try to reach out. And I know it's extremely difficult, but to reach out to the member states and within the member states, the parties, so that there is a critical mass. This is best done together. So to find networks rather than alone, but to unite forces. The idea behind is very much to create some mass among the member states. Otherwise, they might be tempted just to look away and say that we should continue doing what we have been doing. So to unite with other forces and identify these allies within the member states, like-minded, which have an interest in defining a vision for this accession process.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Гледавте Европат. Останете со програмата на телевизија 24.